The email hit her inbox at 10:37 a.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, Final Notice of Termination. Rebecca stared at the screen as if it might change, but it didn't. Her contract had been cut, again, thanks to another round of university budget slashes. This time, there was no department to shuffle into, no appeals to file, no polite reassurances from HR. After 12 years working as a research coordinator at the university library, Rebecca Sullivan was officially unemployed. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she closed her laptop, looked around the cramped two-bedroom apartment she shared with her kids, and listened. The radiator hissed. Somewhere upstairs, someone was vacuuming too aggressively, and from her daughter Zoe's bedroom came the low hum of earbuds and teenage frustration. By noon, Rebecca was on the phone with the landlord. By 12:03, her voice was cracking. 2 more weeks, that's all I'm asking, just until I figure something out. But the answer was cold and final. You've been a great tenant, Rebecca, but I already have someone lined up to take over next month. I'm sorry. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the blank TV screen across the room. Her once auburn hair had dulled, her cheekbones sharper than they used to be. She looked tired, not just physically, but the kind of tired that lived in the bones and didn't leave. They had savings, barely. Just under $1,300 left after rent, groceries, and the copay for Finn's allergy meds. Not enough for a new apartment in Phoenix. Not enough for a motel long-term. Not enough for anything, really. That night, after putting the kids to bed, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of discount red wine and an open laptop. She typed into the search bar, cheap rural homes for sale, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. Not that she had any real hope, just desperation. The listings were bleak, burned-out trailers, abandoned lots, houses with extensive water damage that looked like moldy nightmares. But then something caught her eye. Charming farmhouse, Millfield, New Mexico, $980, needs TLC. She blinked. Surely that was a typo. The photos showed a weathered 2-story home, nestled in a dry patch of land, framed by distant hills. The siding was chipped, the porch sagged, but the windows were intact. It had a barn, a well, and acres of land that hadn't been touched in years. Millfield, she'd never heard of it. Google Maps showed it as a pinprick west of Las Cruces, population 412. No major highways, no Walmart, no Starbucks, just dirt roads and stories. The listing had been up for months, no offers. Rebecca hesitated. She clicked through the photos again, zooming in on the front door, a faded blue with an iron knocker shaped like a lion's head. Something about it made her chest ache. It was broken, neglected, and forgotten, just like she felt. The next morning, she made a decision. Kids, she called from the hallway, pack an overnight bag. We're going on a little trip. Finn popped his head out first, already wearing mismatched socks and holding a dinosaur-shaped lunchbox. Are we going to Grandma's? Nope, she said with a half smile. Somewhere new. Zoe stepped out next, arms crossed. Define somewhere new, because last time it was a gas station museum in Yuma. Rebecca ruffled her daughter's hair. It's a surprise. By 10:15 a.m., they were on the road, the old Corolla rattling like a tin can on wheels. Phoenix faded behind them, replaced by scrubland, dust devils, and a horizon that stretched too far. Finn sang along to every song on the radio. Zoe buried herself in a book about ancient languages and made occasional skeptical noises when the GPS lost signal. As they passed the "Welcome to New Mexico" sign, Rebecca checked her phone. No reception. They stopped once for gas, twice for snacks, and a third time because Finn swore he saw a UFO. It wasn't until they reached a narrow unpaved road flanked by barbed wire fences that she realized just how far they'd come. Millfield didn't have a welcome sign. It had a rusted post where one used to be. There was a diner with a flickering open sign, a tiny church with a hand-painted cross, and a boarded-up elementary school. A faded map stapled to the gas station wall showed the town's layout. Only 6 streets, a handful of homes, and one listing circled in red ink, their destination. Rebecca parked in front of the farmhouse just before sunset. The house looked even more exhausted in person, but it stood. Zoe stepped out first. This looks haunted. Finn ran straight for the porch. Can I explore the barn? Stay close, Rebecca said automatically. She approached the house slowly. Her boots crunched on gravel. The dry wind tugged at her coat. She reached out and touched the lionhead knocker, cold despite the sun. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to the sky. Please, let this be something. Behind her, Zoe muttered, We drove 3 hours to look at a fixer-upper that probably has rats. But Rebecca wasn't listening. Her gaze stayed fixed on the crooked windows, the cracked chimney, the ivy curling like veins up the western wall. She didn't know it yet, but this house, this forgotten relic in the middle of nowhere, was the first page of a story that would change everything. A story that had been waiting centuries for someone like her to find it. Finn, pressed up against the window, grinned. It looks like a haunted house. Rebecca exhaled slowly, her fingers tight around the steering wheel. Let's hope it's just quiet. The farmhouse stood at the edge of a sloping hill, its wood siding faded to a dusty gray. The porch sagged in the middle like it had given up years ago, and ivy had claimed most of the front wall. The windows stared blankly back, some still intact, others missing completely, as if the house had long since stopped trying to keep out the outside world. A rusted Ford pickup was already parked to the side. A woman in a smart tan jacket and low heels stood leaning against the driver's side door, arms folded, checking her watch. Her smile was quick but tight when Rebecca stepped out of the car. You must be Ms. Sullivan. I'm Dana Matthews. I'm with First County Realty, the woman said briskly, extending a hand. Rebecca shook it. Nice to meet you. Dana gestured toward the house. I'll be honest with you, this one's been on our listings for a long time. The owners are motivated to sell, extremely motivated. Why hasn't anyone else bought it? Zoe asked, stepping out of the car with her backpack slung low on one shoulder. Dana hesitated. Some folks around here think it's cursed, but really it's just old, needs love and a lot of repair. Just then, a screen door creaked open from the house next door. An elderly woman in a wide straw hat and quilted vest stepped out onto her porch, shading her eyes with a wrinkled hand. Well, I'll be damned. Someone finally came to look at the Harrington place, she called. Dana waved politely. That's Martha Jenkins. She's lived here longer than anyone else on this road. Used to know the old owner. Martha started walking toward them, slow but steady. Rebecca leaned closer to Dana. Harrington? William Harrington. He owned the house for nearly 40 years, taught medieval history at the State University. Bit of a recluse, no family that we know of. Martha arrived, her gaze sharp but not unkind. He was more than a recluse. William was peculiar, spoke in riddles half the time, brilliant but always looking for something just out of reach. You knew him? Rebecca asked. Oh yes, we'd have coffee sometimes. He didn't trust many people, but he trusted me enough to rant about his work. Said the house was sitting on a story the world wasn't ready to hear. Never explained what that meant, though. Rebecca offered a polite smile, but her mind was already racing. A man obsessed with secrets, a house no one wanted, a price that didn't make sense. None of it added up. But all that mattered right now was whether she could afford to put a roof over her kids' heads. Dana opened the front door with a dramatic tug. It's not pretty, but it's solid. Come on in. They stepped into a hallway thick with dust and the sharp tang of old wood. The floor creaked beneath their feet. Wallpaper peeled in long strips. A chandelier hung crooked over the main room, its crystals caked with grime. This place smells like a church attic, Zoe muttered. Finn wandered off into the next room. This is so cool. Look, there's a fireplace with lion heads. Rebecca wandered slowly through the rooms, taking it all in. Beneath the rot and wear, there was something. Grandeur, maybe. The high ceilings, the arched windows, the intricate crown molding. All of it whispered of a time when someone cared deeply about this house. She turned to Dana. What's the listing price again? Dana named a number that made Rebecca blink. That low? She asked, suspicious. Dana offered a shrug. Like I said, motivated seller. They've had it appraised 3 times in the last decade. No serious offers. Most people come, look around, and bolt. You're the first person who stayed longer than 20 minutes. Rebecca felt Zoe's gaze on her, quiet and skeptical. Finn was already sitting on the dusty hardwood floor, playing with a stick he'd found outside. I don't have much, Rebecca admitted. If I made an offer below asking, would they even consider it? Dana nodded. I can pass it along. But if you're serious, move fast. I doubt anyone else will jump, but with houses like this, it's first come, first served. Rebecca walked out onto the back porch alone. The backyard was overgrown but wide. Past the tall grass and toppled fencing, she could just make out the tree line. The place was isolated, yes, but it was also quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in weeks, she could imagine breathing again. She looked back at the house, weathered and broken, but standing, so much like herself. When she returned to Dana, her voice was steady. I want to make an offer, 10% below asking. Dana arched a brow. That's bold. Rebecca didn't blink. It's what I can do. I'll call it in. Less than an hour later, the call came back. Offer accepted. No counter. Seriously, Zoe said, almost disbelieving. They didn't even try to negotiate? Martha, who'd stuck around, chuckled softly. Told you, nobody else wants it. Not anymore. Rebecca stood in the doorway as the sun began to sink low behind the hills, casting long shadows over the cracked porch and ivy-covered walls. She had just bought a house. No, she had just gambled everything on a crumbling farmhouse in a town she'd never heard of, owned by a long-dead professor who believed it sat atop a forgotten story. As Zoe helped Finn gather their things from the car, Martha stepped closer. Rebecca, she said gently, this house, it isn't just old, it remembers. Take care of it, and it might just reveal what it's been holding on to all these years. Rebecca met her gaze, unsure what to say. Martha just smiled and turned to leave. And somewhere inside the house, from a room no one had opened yet, something creaked. The wind outside had a way of finding the cracks in the old house, sneaking through them like a whisper with secrets to tell. The Sullivan farmhouse, in its slanted silence, groaned and shifted under the weight of dusk. Faint light filtered in through age-stained windows, casting long streaks across walls that hadn't heard laughter in years. It had been a day of small victories, finding a working faucet, airing out the moldy linens, discovering the floorboards didn't all creak in protest. But by sundown, the weariness had settled into Rebecca's bones like dust in a forgotten attic. She stood in the kitchen, elbows deep in a box labeled Misk Silverware, trying to find enough clean forks for dinner. The whole place reeked of damp wood and something older, like the house itself had been holding its breath for years, and now that breath was rising from beneath the floorboards. Then came Finn's voice, sharp, excited, and echoing from the hallway. Mom, you gotta come see this. She dropped the handful of tarnished utensils into the sink and wiped her hands on her jeans as she stepped into the hallway. Finn crouched next to an open floor vent, his eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and mischief. He was holding something wrapped in brittle cloth, its edges frayed like old bandages. Rebecca knelt beside him. Where'd you find that? It was jammed in the vent, he said, like someone stuffed it in there on purpose. The fabric fell away in her hands, revealing a ring of keys, iron, cold, and oddly intricate. They weren't the kind you'd expect to open a back door or filing cabinet. Each one looked hand-forged, misshapen with age, some so large she couldn't imagine what kind of lock they belonged to. She turned one over in her palm, a key with a twisted stem, and 3 teeth like fangs. These are ancient, Finn grinned, treasure keys. She smiled back, but something in the pit of her stomach tightened. That night, long after Zoe and Finn had gone to bed and the house had gone still, Rebecca sat alone at the dining table. The ring of keys lay in front of her, their metallic scent mingling with the stale air. One key in particular kept drawing her eye, the heaviest of the bunch, with a crescent-shaped head and a notch that looked deliberate, designed. She remembered the door. It had been there since their first walkthrough, a hulking thing at the end of the downstairs hall, sealed with an odd, square lock that didn't match anything else in the house. The realtor had brushed it off as an old storm cellar, permanently shut after flooding years ago. But something about it had nagged at her ever since. And now, the keys. She took the flashlight from the junk drawer, the metal cold in her grip, and started down the hallway. Each footstep seemed to echo louder than the last, past the pantry, past the broom closet, and there it was. The door, tall, silent, waiting. She ran her fingers over the lock. An old iron mechanism fused to the wood like it had grown there. The surface felt smoother than it looked, almost oily. Without hesitation, she slid in the first key. No give. The second scraped, then jammed. The third slipped halfway before stopping like it had changed its mind. It wasn't until the fifth key, thicker, jagged, colder, that she felt the shift. A subtle click, then a soft exhale, as if the house itself had been holding the lock in its throat. The door creaked open on its own weight. The air that spilled out wasn't stale. It was still, as if sealed in time. She stepped through. The flashlight's beam pierced the dark and revealed a staircase, not made of wood, but stone, worn smooth down the center by years of passage. The walls surrounding her weren't drywall or plaster. They were stone, etched with patterns so delicate and strange they seemed to shimmer under the weak light. Each step she took felt like crossing a threshold, not just deeper into the house, but into something much older than it. Down below, the space widened into a chamber, round and vaulted. The temperature dropped, but she wasn't shivering from the cold. This place wasn't just hidden, it was sacred. In the center of the room sat a stone pedestal, its surface dustless, as if time refused to settle there. Around it were empty wooden shelves, brittle and splintered, but clearly once used to hold objects of importance. The air smelled of mineral, ink, and something she couldn't name, a scent that felt like memory. On the walls, faded symbols danced along the stone, trailing in loops and spirals. Crimson and gold paint still clung to the deepest grooves, faint echoes of murals now lost to time. She stepped further in, flashlight flickering as it crossed the ceiling, and stopped. Above her, carved into the dome, was a design, 12 spokes branching out from a central point, like a compass or sunburst. At the center of it all, a perfectly round indentation, shallow but not empty, waiting. Rebecca stepped beneath it, raised the light. Her breath caught. It wasn't just a carving, it was a mechanism, a keyhole, but not for a door, for something more complex, ritualistic, precise. Something clicked in her mind. The keys were never meant to open doors. They were meant to activate something. She turned slowly toward the far wall, scanning for more markings, and then she saw it, just above eye level, etched deep into the stone in a hand less ancient than the rest. The last door opens only for the chosen. Her flashlight wavered in her grip. She didn't know who had left the message, or when, but it felt as though it had been waiting, not just to be read, but to be believed. And tonight, someone had finally come. The cold hadn't lifted since Rebecca opened that door. Even as the morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of the old farmhouse, the air inside remained heavy, like it carried something ancient in its lungs. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee she hadn't touched, her fingers tracing the rim absent-mindedly. Across from her, Zoe and Finn argued about cereal, oblivious to the discovery that had changed everything the night before. She hadn't slept. Not really. She had spent hours replaying the sensation of the key turning, the way the door groaned open like it hadn't been disturbed in centuries, and the stone stairwell that plunged deeper than any basement ought to go. Something in her bones told her the space below wasn't just hidden, it had been forgotten for a reason. Later that afternoon, once the kids were settled with their schoolwork and an old cartoon, she made her way back to the locked door at the end of the hallway. She brought tools this time, a heavier flashlight, gloves, a notebook. Part of her still wondered if what she had seen was the result of exhaustion, a trick of light and nerves stretched too thin. But the chill that seeped from the crack under the door told her otherwise. It was real. She descended again. The air changed with each step, less like a basement, more like a tomb. There was no scent of mildew or mold, only the dry, dense weight of earth and age. When the stairwell leveled out, she stepped into the chamber and gasped again, though she'd been bracing herself for it. It wasn't just a room. It was a structure, circular in shape, nearly 40 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling carved from a single span of dark stone. The walls were not brick, not cement, but something older, cut with impossibly smooth precision. Patterns, both geometric and organic, flowed like veins along the surfaces, some barely visible, others highlighted by faint traces of pigment that shimmered under the beam of her flashlight. She moved slowly, every breath echoing in the silence like it didn't belong. In the center of the room stood a wide stone table, waist-high, shaped like an altar but without religious symbols. It was built from the same dark stone, polished to a glassy finish that felt cool even without touching it. Around the perimeter of the chamber stood what looked like display cases, some shattered, others perfectly intact, made of thick glass and dark wood. Within them were remnants of something resembling ancient equipment, tarnished brass instruments, metal spheres etched with fine markings, and rolled-up parchments sealed in wax. Rebecca felt more like she'd stepped into a museum that hadn't had visitors in 1,000 years. She approached the table and noticed a leather-bound journal, dusty but intact. The name on the cover stopped her breath, W.H. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was tight and slanted, unmistakably the same as the note she'd seen Martha holding days before. William Harrington, the man no one had seen for years, the man Martha described as brilliant and strange. The journal wasn't just a personal log, it read like a researcher's archive. She flipped past diagrams and sketches until she found the phrase that made her heart thump against her ribs. Maddock Expedition, Day 14, coordinates align with Avalon Hypothesis. Avalon, the mythical place of rest, of power, of endings and beginnings. She scanned further. 12 nodes across North America, each aligned with stellar points and subsurface anomalies. The Millfield site is the 12th. Final. Rebecca stared at the words, trying to reconcile the academic tone with what lay around her. This wasn't fiction. This was the research of a man who had found something, or someone had made sure no one believed he had. She turned to the next page, where a circular diagram had been drawn by hand, a ring of 12 dots, all connected by curved lines that resembled constellations more than roads. And at the center of the diagram was a hollow circle, no label, just an empty space. Rebecca glanced around the room. Her flashlight caught on something near the far wall, a low platform with a circular stone embedded into its center. It was smooth and symmetrical, with carved grooves spiraling inward toward a shallow depression about the size of a small bowl. She knelt beside it, brushing away the fine dust that had settled across its face. The grooves formed a pattern, not just decorative, but mechanical, like a locking mechanism or a dial. A slot just beneath the central depression caught her attention. It looked like it was waiting for something. A key? No, something broader, flatter. A keystone, perhaps, a part that completed a circuit. The thought pulsed in her mind with alarming clarity. Rebecca backed away slowly, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just a room. This was a site, a node, a terminal left behind by people who had mapped the stars and buried their knowledge with intention. Above her, the dome ceiling whispered nothing but the hush of air and time. Yet beneath that silence, something had stirred, something that had waited in the dark. The keystone had been resting quietly on the windowsill for 2 days, wrapped in a piece of velvet cloth Martha had handed Rebecca the morning after they moved in. At the time, the old woman said little beyond, "You'll know when to use it." But Rebecca hadn't known, until now. Her fingers hovered over the ancient object, smooth, heavy, and etched with runes she couldn't decipher. It felt both impossibly old and strangely alive, like it had a heartbeat trapped inside stone. The air in the subterranean chamber had grown thick with anticipation, as though the room itself had been holding its breath. The circle embedded in the stone floor, an intricate ring with carved channels spiraling inward like the grooves of a vinyl record, waited beneath her feet. At its center, a shallow, round depression sat empty. The shape matched the keystone exactly. "Are you sure about this?" Zoe asked, her voice quiet but firm. She stood behind her mother, a notebook clutched to her chest, filled with half-deciphered symbols and diagrams. Finn sat on the stone bench nearby, his legs swinging restlessly, eyes wide with excitement and a trace of fear. "I'm not sure about anything," Rebecca whispered, "but I think it's time." With a deep breath, she lowered the keystone into the circular slot. The fit was perfect. It clicked into place with a sound more felt than heard, like the exhale of something ancient waking up from a long sleep. Nothing happened at first, just silence. But then, beneath their feet, a subtle vibration stirred. The floor beneath the stone circle began to rotate, slowly, then faster, its rings shifting in opposite directions like interlocking gears. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep in the walls, a low hum rose, steady and rhythmic, as if the house itself had started to breathe. Blue light surged through the grooves of the floor, tracing paths like veins. The glow pulsed outward, up the walls, across the domed ceiling, and then, suddenly, exploded upward into the air. A three-dimensional projection burst into life above the stone platform. A vast, floating map, suspended in midair, made of shimmering light and layered constellations. It wasn't just a topographical map of North America, it was a multi-era simulation. Cities flickered in and out of existence. Mountain ranges shifted. Coastlines receded and advanced like breath. It was as if time itself had been turned into a visual language. Zoe gasped. This is impossible. That's the Mississippi River, but pre-Columbian, and those pyramids aren't on any modern record. Finn squinted. Is that a building inside a mountain? The projection expanded. Circles of light pinpointed 12 locations across the continent. At each site, a different structure materialized in midair, some resembling ziggurats, others like massive obsidian towers, and one, unmistakably, a giant stone arch surrounded by fire pits. Each was unlike anything known in current archaeological records. Rebecca couldn't move. Her legs felt anchored to the stone, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I think this is a network," she murmured, stepping closer to the light. "Not just ruins. These are connected." Zoe was already scribbling, her pen nearly tearing the paper in her haste. "Mom, look at the alignment. It's a geodesic pattern, and the 12 points, they correspond to ley lines." The humming grew louder. The floor pulsed again, sending another surge of light into the air. This time, lines connected the 12 points on the map, like arteries feeding from one heart. In the center of it all sat a symbol, a 12-petaled flower overlaid with an open eye. "What's happening?" Finn whispered, tugging at Rebecca's sleeve. "I don't know," she said, though she wasn't entirely telling the truth. A part of her, buried deep in instinct, knew exactly what this was. It wasn't technology, not in the modern sense. It was memory, a memory the earth itself had been keeping. Then came the voice, not a sound, not a whisper, but a feeling, a thought, not her own, pressed gently into her mind. "You've been found. The gate has seen you." Rebecca stepped back, breath catching. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Zoe looked up from her notes. "I didn't hear anything, but I felt it, like someone thinking at me." The projection flickered. One of the 12 locations glowed brighter, the one furthest west, in what looked like the Colorado Plateau. A pulse rippled out from that point, and the entire map dimmed for a moment, like a heartbeat. Far above them, miles above, sat a network of government satellites scanning North American soil for unusual electromagnetic activity. And in that moment, one of those sensors blinked red. A signal unlike anything it had recorded before had flared from a quiet farmhouse in Millfield. Buried stone beneath it had suddenly become visible. Inside a secure military facility in Virginia, an alert began flashing. 3 technicians leaned over their consoles, exchanging baffled looks. "This is real time?" one asked. "Affirmative," said another. "And it's not a glitch." Back in the chamber, the glowing circle slowed, the map dissolving like smoke into the air. The keystone remained embedded in its slot, now faintly pulsing, as if keeping rhythm with something older than time. Rebecca touched her chest, the breath finally returning to her lungs. "Whatever this is," she said, "it just woke up." Zoe nodded slowly. "And it knows we're here." Finn pointed to the keystone, now glowing faintly. Can we turn it off? Rebecca hesitated. I don't think we can, not anymore. Somewhere outside, unnoticed by them, a faint humming had begun beneath the earth, like something dormant, shifting. The light of dawn hadn't yet broken over Millfield when Rebecca found herself wide awake, curled in an armchair with William Harrington's journal still open on her lap. The symbols from the stone chamber swirled in her mind like ghosts she couldn't name. She hadn't slept much since activating the ancient mechanism hidden beneath her house. Something had shifted, not just in the floor beneath her feet, but in her very understanding of what was real, what was possible. Finn and Zoe were still asleep upstairs. The farmhouse was quiet, save for the low creak of its aging bones. She glanced toward the trapdoor, now locked again, hiding the entrance to what could only be described as an impossibility. The journal had mentioned names, coordinates, 12 of them aligned with something William called the First Haven. There were notes, half-erased thoughts about energy fields, celestial alignments, and something called the Custodian Network. And then there was the name scrawled in the margins, Dr. Elena Kincaid. The script was urgent, personal. Rebecca stared at it for a long while, heart fluttering against her ribs. She didn't know the woman, but William had trusted her, entrusted her maybe. The journal hadn't just been a record, it had been a plea. A relay baton passed forward in time to someone who might understand what he'd unearthed. By 7 a.m., Rebecca had found the number. It hadn't been easy. The academic world was a labyrinth of outdated contact pages and shuttered faculty offices, but the name Elena Kincaid still held weight in the obscure corners of medieval historiography and pre-Celtic symbology. Her last known position was listed at a private institute in Boston, an off-the-books research hub for ancient civilizations and comparative mythography. Rebecca dialed with a shaking hand. It rang once, twice, then silence. She was about to hang up when a soft, clear voice answered. "This is Dr. Kincaid." Rebecca froze. The words in her throat tangled. I'm sorry to call like this," she managed. "My name is Rebecca Sullivan. I think you knew a man named William Harrington." There was a long pause, a breath caught on the other end, and then the tone of the call shifted entirely. "I'm listening," said the voice, sharper now, alert. "Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Rebecca recounted it all. The farmhouse, the hidden stone chamber, the journal, the mechanism. She left out nothing, not even the strange sensation when the keystone had locked into place, not even the map that had bloomed into the air, not even the way her son had looked at it as if he'd seen it in a dream. By the time she finished, the other end of the line was breathless. "William wasn't mad," Kincaid whispered. "God, he wasn't mad. They told him he was chasing phantoms, but I always knew he'd found something." Rebecca hesitated. "Then it's real? The 12 points? The First Haven?" "It's more than real," Kincaid said. "It's prehistorical infrastructure, a distributed network of sites older than known civilization, meant to preserve knowledge, energy, maybe even contact. The First Haven was theorized to be the primary node, the original seed site." Rebecca looked toward the floor beneath her, heart pounding. "It's under my house." "I'm coming," Kincaid said without hesitation. "I have a team. We've waited decades for something like this. We'll fly out within 48 hours. Rebecca should have felt relief, but instead, an unease bloomed, because something else was coming too. That same morning, miles away, a black van pulled off an unmarked road and stopped at the edge of a field. Inside sat Dr. Victoria Abrams. The room she occupied, technically a mobile command unit, hummed with energy. Screens flickered with incoming data. One in particular showed a pulsing map. In the center, Millfield, Missouri. Converging lines of electromagnetic disturbance had drawn the attention of a sensitive government array used to monitor seismic anomalies. And then there had been the energy spike, exactly 2:43 a.m. Eastern Time, the kind of spike you didn't ignore. Dr. Abrams sipped her coffee without looking away from the screen. "Have we confirmed the origin site?" Her assistant nodded. "Private residence. Belongs to a Rebecca Sullivan. Purchased recently at below market value. Single mother, no known affiliations, no flagged history. She's not important, Abrams said flatly. The site is... A technician turned from his station. Should we make contact? Not yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with. By mid-afternoon, Rebecca was outside watering the withered tomato vines when the first unmarked SUV appeared. It parked 2 properties down. No one got out. Then another vehicle showed up and idled by the gravel drive. She felt the weight of eyes watching her. That night, after putting Finn to bed, she found Zoe sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, poring over a hand-drawn sketch of the map they had seen inside the chamber. "Why did it show us that?" Zoe asked quietly. "Why us?" Rebecca didn't have an answer, but she knelt beside her daughter, tracing one of the glowing nodes Zoe had marked. "Because it needed someone to listen," she said, "and maybe we were the only ones who did." The following morning, the knock on the door came. Rebecca opened it to a composed woman in a charcoal blazer and low heels. She didn't introduce herself, just held out a badge. "Dr. Victoria Abrams, Department of Energy. We're conducting a survey of anomalous activity in the region. May I come in?" Rebecca stepped into the doorway, blocking it. "This is private property." "We're aware. We'd like to ensure nothing hazardous is happening underground. For your safety, of course." Rebecca met her gaze. "There's nothing to be concerned about. I'd know if there were." Behind Abrams, a second vehicle idled. 2 men sat inside, one on a laptop. Another watched the exchange over the rim of a paper cup. "We may have to return with a court order," Abrams said evenly. "For now, we'll leave you in peace, but I'd advise you to be cooperative." Rebecca shut the door without replying. By sunset, she was calling Kincaid again. "They've already found us," she whispered. Kincaid didn't sound surprised. "Then there's no time to waste. I'll be on the next flight. And Rebecca, don't open that door to anyone else." That night, a storm rolled across the hills. Inside the farmhouse, the floor trembled, not with thunder, but with something deeper, something stirring, waiting, listening. And far away, in 11 other places, faint lights blinked into life, each responding to the call of one that had finally been answered after 15 long years. The floor of the chamber still hummed with a faint vibration from the activation sequence, like the aftershock of something ancient stirring in its sleep. The symbols carved into the stone dome continued to pulse with that eerie, soft blue glow, rhythmic and alive. Rebecca stood at the edge of the pedestal, one hand resting lightly on its surface, her eyes locked on the now dormant mechanism. Her heart hadn't slowed since the keystone had clicked into place. Dr. Elena Kincaid had been speechless when she first stepped into the room. The seasoned academic, always meticulous and composed, now wandered the circular chamber like someone pulled through time. Her eyes traced every groove, every etched line, her fingers hovering above the inscriptions but never quite touching. "It's impossible," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "This architecture, it's pre-antiquity, and yet, the engineering, it surpasses even the most optimistic reconstructions of Atlantean myths." Zoe watched her curiously from a nearby wall, notebook in hand. Finn knelt by the glowing ring, his fingers itching to touch the controls again. Rebecca shot him a warning glance, and he wisely backed off. "You believe it now?" Rebecca asked quietly, stepping closer to the professor. "I believed it then," Kincaid replied, not taking her eyes off the walls. "I just never thought I'd see it. William tried to tell me, you know. Everyone laughed at him, even I." She trailed off, her voice cracking slightly. "He wasn't a madman. He was, what did he always say? An archivist out of time." Rebecca tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Kincaid knelt beside the base of the pedestal and gently pressed her palm against the edge. With a low whir, part of the wall behind them shifted, revealing a hidden recess. Inside was a curved piece of polished metal, thin as a wafer and etched with thousands of minute glyphs. It hovered slightly when lifted, catching the light with an iridescent shimmer. "What is that?" Zoe asked, stepping forward. "A data slate," Kincaid said. "At least, that's what William called it in his notes. He said this place, the First Haven, was designed not to protect people, but knowledge." Rebecca moved toward the slate, heart pounding. Then what's the knowledge it's protecting? Kincaid turned toward her. Not history, she said softly. A warning. Silence pressed down on the chamber. The word hung in the air like smoke. Kincaid placed the slate on the pedestal. The room reacted immediately. Lines of light shot from the ring into the ceiling, and then, as if guided by unseen hands, a beam focused on a single point above them. The dome dimmed, and a projection formed. It wasn't a map this time. It was the sky. Stars bloomed above them, thousands of points of light dancing across the chamber's ceiling. Constellations formed and unraveled, patterns shifting, aligning. And then, slowly, one image solidified, a rotating view of Earth, surrounded by orbiting symbols. At each turn, the projection paused over what looked like planetary conjunctions from millennia ago. Rebecca's breath hitched. It's astronomical. More than that, Kincaid said, her voice thin. It's a record. She moved toward the edge of the ring and pulled out a small recording device from her coat. She spoke into it calmly, though her hands were trembling. Date, May 18th. Location, Millfield, Oklahoma. Visual confirmation of prehistorical star maps synchronized with planetary configurations dating back more than 10,000 years. Data alignment matches Harrington's unpublished Avalon hypothesis. Zoe stepped beside her mother, face pale. What does it mean? Before Kincaid could answer, the room shifted again. The central platform sank a few inches, and in its place, a new mechanism emerged, 12 stone prongs circling an empty core. Rebecca leaned in. Is that a selector? Kincaid whispered. 12 points, just like the starburst on the ceiling. This whole thing, it's interactive. Then the light turned. The constellation display dimmed, and a soft pulse of light moved from one of the outer points toward the center. A symbol lit up on the ring, one none of them recognized, not from any known alphabet. A low tone filled the chamber. Not a sound, exactly, but something deeper, something that resonated through bone and breath. And in that moment, Rebecca heard it, not through her ears, but in her mind. We have waited. She staggered backward, eyes wide. What was that? Kincaid's face had gone pale. You heard it too? Rebecca nodded. We have waited. The doors remain. 12 remain. One is open. Others stir. The voice wasn't threatening, but neither was it warm. It was ancient, tired, watching. Finn clung to Zoe's side, eyes round as saucers. Mom, who's talking to us? Rebecca didn't answer. She was still trying to breathe. Zoe pointed up. The light, it's shifting again. A beam traced the outline of a second point on the stone ring, then a third. Slowly, all 12 began to glow. Then, another message. The stars align again. The custodians must return. The chamber dimmed. Silence returned, but none of them felt alone. Kincaid was the first to move. She stepped back and sank onto a bench beside the wall, hands cradling her head. William knew. He wasn't just studying this. He was preparing for it. Rebecca turned to her. Preparing how? He believed. Kincaid looked up, her voice hoarse. He believed that these places were designed to be awakened when humanity reached a certain point, when we were ready. But he also feared we'd try to control it, to weaponize it. Zoe whispered, Are we ready? No one answered. From above, a low thrum of electricity buzzed through the floor. Rebecca looked up sharply. Did you hear that? Kincaid's head snapped toward the stairwell. That's not the system. Rebecca bolted for the stairs. She pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway just as Finn came running from the kitchen. Mom, there's a truck outside, a black one, with antennas. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She turned to Kincaid. They're here. The professor nodded grimly. They must have intercepted the energy signature from the keystone. Rebecca stepped past her children, hands braced against the wall as she stared out the window. At the edge of the long driveway stood a vehicle, dark, armored, silent, and standing next to it, a woman in a gray government coat, Dr. Victoria Abrams. The woman raised a hand and waved. They were too late to stop it, but right on time to try. The moment the projection dimmed and flickered back to life, the chamber seemed to inhale. A hush fell over the room, heavy as stone, as if the ancient system itself were preparing to speak again after millennia of silence. One by one, the 12 radiant markers on the floating map began to pulse in sync, 12 luminous nodes stretching across the continent. First was the central point, still hovering just above Millfield, then a ring of others, spanning from deep in the Nevada desert to a snow-covered ridge in the Canadian Yukon, a dense forest in Oregon, a submerged shelf off the coast of Maine, an abandoned settlement in Arizona. Each location shimmered with the same cool electric blue. Zoe, standing beside the projection, instinctively reached for her notebook, but her hand trembled too much to write. "They're responding to us," she whispered. Finn leaned forward, eyes wide. "It's like they've woken up." Rebecca didn't speak. Her gaze was fixed on the map, her heart pounding like war drums in her chest. Something deep within her, a place beyond thought or language, was vibrating in resonance with the light. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel it, like a calling she'd never known she was waiting for. And then the room shifted. Not physically, nothing moved, but the air itself changed. A strange warmth bloomed along her palm, slow at first, then sharp like metal heating under skin. She gasped and pulled back her hand, cradling it. A small spiral, glowing and intricate like a fingerprint etched in light, was forming on the center of her palm. Zoe saw it first. "Mom, your hand." Rebecca looked down. The glowing mark pulsed faintly, the same color as the lights on the map. A swirl of blue energy danced just beneath the skin. Dr. Kincaid approached, eyes wide behind her glasses. "It's a resonance signature," she said, breathless. "I've only read about theoretical cases, artifacts that imprint a symbolic frequency on those deemed attuned." Rebecca looked up. "Attuned to what?" Before Kincaid could answer, a loud chime echoed through the chamber, a low harmonic vibration that settled in their bones. The projection dimmed again, then flashed once more, this time casting upward into the air a vertical beam, a 3D model of Earth slowly rotating, the 12 points now connected by lines of light, forming a near-perfect geometric shape. A sacred geometry. Finn stared up in awe. "It's a network." "No," Zoe corrected, squinting. "It's a system." Up above, the beam narrowed, sharpened, then split into multiple streams, each one stretching far beyond the globe, linking stars and constellations no one could name. The chamber seemed to breathe in tandem with it, like it was part of something much, much larger. The moment broke when the intercom in the kitchen crackled, something Rebecca hadn't even realized was still functioning. "This is Dr. Victoria Abrams, Federal Liaison. Please exit the house and meet us at the perimeter gate." Rebecca's stomach sank. She climbed out of the chamber with Kincaid at her heels, leaving the kids behind just long enough to peek through the nearest window. 3 black SUVs were parked along the gravel road outside the property fence. Men and women in dark uniforms were setting up a perimeter, tripods, sensors, and thermal scanners. A small mobile command center had been assembled, and standing at the edge of it was Dr. Abrams, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Rebecca met her outside. The night had fallen fast, the moon overhead casting a pale wash of light over the fields. Dr. Abrams didn't bother with pleasantries. "We've picked up anomalous energy spikes from this region in the last 2 hours, signals consistent with ancient frequency bands never before recorded in this hemisphere. Tell me exactly what you've done." Rebecca didn't flinch. "We activated a system. That's all I know." The government official narrowed her eyes. "You're in possession of a possible national-level artifact. Until further notice, this property is under federal surveillance. You and your family will need to vacate the premises until it's deemed safe." "No," Rebecca said sharply. "We're not leaving." Abrams raised a brow. "This isn't optional." Dr. Kincaid stepped forward. "Yes, it is. This house was purchased legally, and as of now, there is no evidence of biological or explosive threat. You have no grounds for seizure." "I'm acting under emergency authority," Abrams snapped. "And I am acting under the authority of academic stewardship," Kincaid countered. "This discovery isn't a threat, it's a cultural legacy, and you don't even know what you're looking at." Rebecca stepped closer. This house chose me. Whatever that system is, it responded to me. Not you, not your tech, me. Abrams looked between them, her expression calculating. You expect me to believe some ancient device has imprinted itself on you like you're its chosen guardian? Rebecca opened her hand. The glowing spiral pulsed once more, brighter now, as if hearing the challenge in Abrams's voice. Kincaid's tone softened, but it held steel beneath. You're out of your depth, Victoria. If you touch that system without understanding it, you may trigger something you can't undo. A tense silence followed. Finally, Abrams turned on her heel and strode back to the command center. Keep the house under observation. No one gets in or out without my sign-off. The floodlights snapped on, and the hum of power generators buzzed in the air. Back inside, Rebecca found Zoe studying the projection again. It changed, the girl said. The points. They're brighter now. The spiral on Rebecca's palm pulsed in rhythm with them. It's not history, Kincaid murmured from the doorway, staring at the light. It's a signal, an invitation, maybe even a test. Rebecca didn't respond, because deep in her bones, beneath the logic and fear and doubt, she knew something sacred had been set in motion, and there was no going back. The morning after the lights flared from the 12 points on the map, Rebecca barely slept. Her dreams had been fragmented, visions of spiraling constellations, stone corridors without end, and a voice whispering in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. When sunlight finally streamed through the farmhouse windows, it felt less like morning and more like a truce between whatever had been stirred the night before and the waking world that still demanded coffee and cereal. Martha Jenkins arrived unannounced, a worn leather envelope clutched in her fragile hands. She stood silently at the door for a beat too long, her face unusually solemn. I think it's time you had this, she said, holding the envelope out with both hands like it weighed more than it should. Rebecca took it cautiously. The leather was cracked, the flaps sealed with a wax emblem she didn't recognize, an archaic sigil pressed into crimson, shaped like an eye within a circle of thorns. Her fingers tingled as she broke the seal. Inside, on brittle paper that smelled faintly of cedar and ink, was a letter in the looping script she now recognized from the journal in the stone chamber, William Harrington's handwriting. But this wasn't just another field note. It began like a will and ended like a confession. To whomever inherits what lies beneath, know this. You were not chosen by accident. The system responds only to those it remembers, those who carry the echo of the original keepers. We were not the first. We are not the last. We are simply the ones awake when the bell rings. Attached was a second document, a smaller folded sheet titled The Custodian Code. It listed not rules, but a doctrine, a code of ethics bound not by science or faith, but by responsibility. Knowledge is not possession. Protection must outweigh curiosity. If discovery endangers balance, conceal it. If power is misused, disable it. Above all, remember, you serve the truth, not your ambition. Rebecca stared at the words, her heart pounding. This wasn't just about ancient architecture or lost civilizations. It was stewardship, an inherited mantle from a lineage no one had ever written down in textbooks. She looked up at Martha, who had taken a seat in the kitchen, quietly steeping tea like it was any other Tuesday. You knew, Rebecca said. Martha didn't flinch. William trusted me with it, but I wasn't the one meant to carry it forward. He told me I'd know when it was time. In the background, Zoe and Finn whispered upstairs, probably debating whether the symbols in the stone room were part of a puzzle or a language. They didn't know yet that their mother had just inherited a secret society without members, a relic without instructions, and a job description that didn't exist in any modern language. Later that afternoon, Dr. Kincaid arrived with a stack of carbon-dated samples and a look that suggested she hadn't slept either. The symbols in the dome, some of them match carvings found in Göbekli Tepe, and others in the Osirian temple in Egypt. But what's more, she hesitated. There's a structural resemblance to something William and I saw in the western desert of Cairo 20 years ago, a chamber we were discouraged from pursuing. Rebecca leaned in. Discouraged? Kincaid's voice dropped. Blocked by military presence. Equipment confiscated. Our visas were canceled overnight. William believed it was connected to this, to whatever he later found here, but without proof. He never published. He didn't want to risk it being buried forever. Rebecca felt the weight of the keystone in her pocket. And now it's not buried. Which is why they're coming. Just as Kincaid finished her sentence, the floorboards vibrated subtly underfoot. A low drone filtered in through the windows, rotor blades approaching low and fast. A moment later, Dr. Victoria Abrams entered the house without knocking, flanked by two men in tactical uniforms with nondescript patches. She didn't offer greetings, only an official-looking tablet and a clipped tone. You're hereby informed that, due to the anomalous energy emissions from this property, the Department of National Continuity and Strategic Assets is designating this site as a Level 3 containment zone. We request your full cooperation moving forward. Rebecca stared her down. Request, not require. Abrams's smile was clinical. For now. As the federal agents fanned out to inspect the house perimeter, Kincaid crossed her arms. This is academic, not military. You don't even know what you're looking at. We don't need to, Abrams replied. We only need to make sure no one else does. Rebecca felt it like a shift in the air, something ancient recoiling from their presence. The circle, the keystone, the very walls below their feet felt alert, tense. It was as if the system itself knew it was being threatened. That night, she returned to the chamber. The carved symbols seemed to glow faintly in her presence. As she passed her hand across the stone wheel, the groove lit up, soft blue light spiraling inward. A pulse moved through the floor like breath. It wasn't mechanical. It was aware. She opened William's journal again, flipping to the last page, where a small note had been scrawled in a different ink in a hurry. If the wrong hands touch the system, use the failsafe. Keystone plus core sequence equals purge. Everything will erase. Better gone than abused. Rebecca pressed her palms against the stone altar. You were planning for this, she whispered. You knew someone like Abrams would come. Down in the dark, she didn't feel alone anymore. She felt watched, not by something hostile, but by something waiting. Not every story was meant to be found. Some stories were sent forward in time, like seeds sealed in glass. And she was the glass now, the last keeper of secrets. The map had begun to spin again, not by accident and not by mistake. It was deliberate, summoned by something Rebecca could feel, but not explain. As the circular platform beneath the stone rings shifted, an unfamiliar vibration hummed through the chamber. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, like ancient breath being stirred awake after centuries of stillness. Zoe, standing just behind her mother, tightened her grip on her notebook. Kincaid, silent for once, watched with reverent stillness. The mechanism beneath their feet emitted a low chime. Then a deep, resonant groan echoed through the room, the sound of stone yielding to stone. A perfect seam cracked open at the base of the floor. From its center, a ring of stone peeled back like petals of some mechanical flower, revealing a spiral staircase descending farther than any blueprint could ever have suggested. Rebecca hesitated, her hand hovering near the edge. The air drifting up from below was colder, drier, like it had never touched lungs before. She looked at Kincaid, who only nodded. So they descended. Each step was a deliberate act of faith. The deeper they moved into the earth, the more the space around them transformed. The walls no longer held the rough, unfinished surface of a forgotten basement. They were smooth, impossibly precise, engraved with patterns neither Roman nor Egyptian nor Mayan, but eerily reminiscent of all three. Symbols pulsed faintly with light, like veins beneath skin. At the bottom of the staircase, the hallway opened into what could only be called a sanctum. It was not a room, it was a vault, circular, vast, and alive with energy, like the inside of a cathedral designed by minds not bound by gravity or time. The ceiling arched high above, forming a perfect dome lined with embedded crystal panels, dim but reactive to motion. Along the walls stood towering glass-like cylinders, filled with swirling light and floating fragments of images, maps, text, shapes that pulsed like holographic constellations. But what held Rebecca breathless was the structure at the very center of the room, a raised pedestal, unlike the others they had seen. This one smaller, sleeker, as if designed for a single participant. Upon it lay a small metal disc, no wider than a silver dollar, nestled into a soft cradle of crystal. It shimmered faintly when approached, reacting to the warmth of human presence. Zoe stepped forward, her eyes wide. "That language," she whispered. "It's the same one I found in the symbols on that rejected manuscript. Remember? From the Blackstone Cave expedition. They said it was a hoax." Kincaid crouched beside one of the wall engravings, scanning it with a handheld device. "This language isn't just unknown. It's intentionally encrypted. There are layers of meaning built into the strokes themselves, like a code within a code." Rebecca didn't speak. She couldn't. Something was pulling at her, not with force, but with a calm, patient invitation. She stepped up to the pedestal and, almost without thinking, reached toward the disc. The moment her fingers touched it, a faint warmth bloomed through her palm. The crystal beneath the device lit up in rippling blue, and the room answered. Light spread in a wave, activating every column, every wall. The symbols on the floor ignited in soft pulses, syncing with her heartbeat. A quiet hum filled the air, not mechanical, not electric. It felt more like a harmony, as if the space itself was singing in recognition. Then the disc lifted. It floated just above her hand, spinning slowly, releasing tendrils of light that extended across the chamber. Each tendril touched a different cylinder, and one by one, the columns began to open. Inside, each stood a single scroll, only they weren't made of paper or papyrus. They shimmered like strands of data, light shaped into coils, hovering in transparent glass. Some displayed scenes, landscapes not of Earth, civilizations with structures that bent the laws of physics. Others showed anatomical diagrams, beings humanoid, yet impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and radiant skin. A low chime echoed, followed by a voice. Not a sound exactly, but a thought. "You have not come by accident. You are known. You are chosen." Rebecca gasped, nearly dropping the disc. Zoe clutched her arm. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," her mother whispered, "but not with my ears." A soft click came from the pedestal. From a hidden compartment, something slid out, an object no larger than a contact lens, but made of shimmering crystal. She lifted it to the light. Kincaid stepped closer. "That's not for vision correction." "It's a key," Rebecca said, though she didn't know how she knew. Her fingers trembled as she brought it close to her eye. The lens melted into her iris without a trace, and the room transformed. What had been walls were now scrolls unfolding in every direction, their languages translated in real time into pure thought. History, philosophy, blueprints, genetic codes. Every piece of knowledge suspended in this place now shimmered directly before her, not in text or image, but in understanding. She stumbled back. Too much, too fast. But the room slowed. It listened. It adjusted. And then came the second thought. You may choose what is known, but know that all knowledge demands its price. Rebecca stepped back, removing her hand from the pedestal. The disc lowered again into its cradle. The room dimmed, though the vault never returned to darkness. She looked at Kincaid. "This isn't a library, it's a test." He didn't argue. They were silent as they ascended, and as the vault door sealed behind them, the air seemed to exhale, as if the chamber had simply returned to sleep. The first sign was silence. Not the usual quiet of Millfield, but an artificial stillness. No birds, no breeze, no creaking wood. Rebecca sensed it before dawn. Something was wrong. Then the power cut. Lights blinked out. The fridge died. No Wi-Fi. Her fully charged phone showed no signal. Total blackout. Outside, black SUVs appeared along the fields. More followed. Armed figures in tactical gear moved into place. It wasn't a visit. It was an operation. Dr. Abrams stepped out, too polished for gravel, already in control. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. Rebecca bolted the door. Upstairs, Zoe stirred while Finn slept. Rebecca rushed them into the hidden stone chamber below, a place shielded from signal and sight, the only sanctuary left. She grabbed the satchel, Harrington's notes, the keystone, the device for accessing the archive. Outside, a man was cutting power at the pole. They weren't just coming in, they were dismantling everything. Abrams's voice rang out through a megaphone. Under federal order, we are seizing this property. Evacuate and comply. Rebecca didn't respond. She gripped the keystone in her pocket. Martha Jenkins emerged from a rear passage. They've surrounded the hill, she warned. 20 men, portable jammers, contractors, but I know spooks when I see 'em. We stall, Rebecca said. You distract. Martha smiled. I've waited 50 years to cause trouble. Outside, tension snapped. The squad advanced. Down below, Zoe crouched beside a waking Finn. The chamber pulsed softly. Symbols on the wall glowed under her touch, once dismissed as pseudoscience, now responding like memory. In the rotunda, Rebecca hovered the keystone above the pedestal. The air vibrated. A low hum built pressure. Then, the front door splintered. Glowing lines raced through the walls below. The vault breathed. Soldiers hit the stairwell. Kincaid, near the rotunda, went live. This is a gross violation of civil, scientific, and moral ethics, she said. Her feed lasted 40 seconds before jammers killed it, but 30,000 people saw. 5,000 grabbed screenshots. Abrams snapped, neutralized the room. At the stone circle, soldiers stepped forward, then froze. A low tone pulsed from the pedestal. Waves of invisible force rippled out. Boots skidded, radios died, lenses fogged, then stillness. No one fell. Everything just stopped. The house had defended itself. Abrams stood, helpless. Below, the vault door opened. A radiant light poured out. Not electric, but living. Memory woven into brilliance. Rebecca stood in its glow. They hadn't found Pandora's box. They'd inherited it. The storm never came with thunder. It crept in with silence. By dawn, the farmhouse stood surrounded not just by fences and sensors, but by decisions too heavy to carry alone. The air was thick with surveillance drones, hovering just far enough to suggest observation without permission. Somewhere above, the eyes of those who feared what they couldn't own were watching. Rebecca hadn't slept. She sat at the edge of the stone chamber, the keystone still warm beneath her hand. The holographic map continued to pulse gently, 12 points lit like constellations on the dark continent above. The room whispered, not in voices, but in gravity. Every breath seemed to weigh more. She could feel it in her bones. They were close to taking it from her, and she had one chance left to decide what the world would know. Kincaid stood nearby, arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes locked on the projections that hovered over the great stone table. Zoe leaned against the far wall, journal in her lap, pen moving in quiet loops as if recording history before it vanished again. Finn, still restless but quieted by awe, traced patterns in the stone floor with his fingers, oblivious to how much depended on what his mother would choose. Rebecca opened the envelope again, the one William Harrington had marked in red wax decades ago. Inside were coordinates, ciphered instructions, and one final line, handwritten in hurried ink. The truth survives best when scattered among the curious, not the powerful. She turned toward Kincaid. If I open it all, everything gets exposed, every piece of this library, but they'll bury it again, or worse, use it. Kincaid didn't answer at first. The professor just nodded slowly, like someone who had already made peace with too many losses. But if you lock it away again, we risk waiting another 1,000 years for someone who might never come. Rebecca looked down at her children. Then came the third choice, not from logic, but from instinct. What if the world got just enough? Not too much to weaponize, not too little to forget. Her fingers danced over the projection interface. She divided the holographic archives into layers. The first tier, fragments of ancient philosophy, non-linear language systems, environmental models, and histories that contradicted every textbook she'd ever known. Harmless in isolation, powerful in implication. She encrypted the rest with a failsafe, a temporal lock that would respond only to a resonance signature linked to the 12 sites. Then she took a breath and pressed send. The package launched into a secure cloud, bouncing between global satellite stations that couldn't be tracked. landing finally in the inboxes of 7 independent researchers, all carefully chosen by Chincade over the past 20 years. People who had been silenced, marginalized, disregarded. They would know what to do. The ground above didn't shake when it happened, but something in the air shifted, a kind of release, like truth, stretching its legs for the first time in ages. Outside, Dr. Abrams received the news that the data had leaked. No force, no raid, no containment order could reverse what had already happened. The choice had been made, and it wasn't hers. She radioed headquarters, voice clipped. "We lost containment." There was a long silence. "Pull back." The trucks rolled out quietly that evening. No explanations, no press conferences, only the silent concession of power retreating. Zoe sat on the steps of the farmhouse as the sun began to dip behind the hills, scribbling the last line of her journal. When the past spoke, she listened, and in return, the future might just remember her name. Inside, Finn pinned a hand-drawn map above the fireplace, 12 glowing points, linked by invisible paths. Beneath it, he scrawled, "The First Haven." Rebecca stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, one eye on the stars. "This isn't the end," she whispered. And somewhere, beneath the farmhouse, the circle pulsed once more, as if agreeing. The story was only beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you, truly. Stories like Rebecca's aren't just fiction. They're reflections of struggle, of resilience, of the quiet kind of bravery that doesn't wear a cape, but moves mountains, one breath at a time. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in her journey, or maybe you're still searching for your own key, your own door, your own first haven. And maybe, just maybe, you felt it too. That whisper beneath the floorboards, that hum behind the silence, that strange pull that says, this story isn't done yet, because it's not. What Rebecca uncovered in that farmhouse is just the beginning. There are more threads to pull, more doors to open, more truths buried beneath centuries of dust and doubt, and we're going to find them together. So if this story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Leave a comment below. Tell us what moment hit you hardest, what you would have done in Rebecca's shoes, or what you think lies beneath the next 12 points on the map. Trust me, every word you write helps us keep the signal alive. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, not just for us, but for the stories waiting in the dark to be told. The ones we'll chase across continents, through time, and into the hearts of people history forgot. Because what comes next? It's bigger, wilder. And if you thought this farmhouse had secrets, just wait until you see what's hidden in the others. This isn't a one-time tale. This is a saga. And if you're still here, you're already part of it. We'll see you in the next chapter. Don't look away. And whatever you do, listen when the earth begins to hum. We'll see you in the next story.